What's going on, everybody? It's been a while. This is Zach Rosenblatt. I'm here with Darryl Slater for the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. We decided we would wait until a million things happened before we came on to talk to you. Just a few things to talk about. But how you doing, Darryl?
I'm doing well. Yeah, obviously it's been not so busy lately for the Giants, but a pretty darn busy stretch there in January and into the middle of February, and then things actually slowed down during free agency. But they did some stuff, and then the draft will be busy. So kind of a weird busy, then slow, then gonna get busy again off season.
Yeah, it was funny. We both were out at the owners' meetings in Palm Beach, which, if you thought the NFL wasn't doing well, that's the most extravagant event you could attend. It's just like the Breakers is the nice one. It felt like a castle when we were there in down in Palm Beach. But John Mara, when we talked to him, the reporter that spoke, Bob Glauber, opened saying something like, "So quiet off season for you guys, huh?" And John Mara was like, "What?" we we have a new coach, new GM. We're in the middle of a lawsuit, and they have a lot of like rumors. But what Bob obviously meant was about like free agency and how it was a lot quieter than it usually is, or it has been around Dave Gettleman. Um, but I thought that was funny because they've made these significant changes, but the NFL offseason moved so fast that feels like almost a year ago at this point.
It really does. Yeah, I mean, Joe Judge fired. We knew Dave Gettleman would be forced into retirement or fired, so they start fresh with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. And and yeah, just when we thought all the coaching stuff was done, then the Brian Flores lawsuit comes out of nowhere, at least from our perspective, and that's still lingering. Is going to be lingering for a little while longer.
Which, by the
But
way, John Mara like was defiant about that and like addressing specific points, so, which was surprising.
yeah, no, I mean that was good for our purposes, and he came obviously knowing he wanted to address that, and we'll see. I mean, we'll see what this winds up being in terms of whether he sits for a deposition or what. And but then everything else has kind of unfolded how we expected, right? I think they kind of made an expected-ish GM hire and then coaching hire. I don't think either of the hires was a surprise. The Flores lawsuit, surprise,
Yeah,
uh, and then free agency, kind of how we figured it would go. A modest approach, focused not really on star players because they didn't have the cap space to do it. I guess maybe the only surprise so far is that they haven't traded James Bradberry. I don't know if you could classify any of the other moves.
I
The
would say.
Logan Ryan cut was
Yeah,
a
I was going to say
surprise.
the Logan
That's
Ryan one
about
was a surprise, but I
the
mean,
other ones.
yeah,
File them under what you'd probably figure business as usual.
yeah, totally. I mean, and if anything, on like a minor surprise level, I think that Sterling Shepard is back and that Blake Martinez is back. Like you never know if a guy's going to accept a pay cut, and those two accepted pretty significant pay cuts. Um, so those are maybe not. I mean, that's a positive thing because they weren't. The reality was the Giants weren't going to sign. We're not going to sign a linebacker better than Blake Martinez, and they were not going to sign a receiver better than Sterling Shepard. So you take those as wins because, like you mentioned, like their big free agent signing was Mark Lewinsky. Which, if I had asked you about him 2 months ago, Darryl, you would not have known who that was. So
Yeah, I think the response would have been who, and I think a
yeah,
lot of casual Giants fans would have thought that. But I mean, look, I mean, obviously he'll be and it's a low bar, but he'll be
oh
an
for
upgrade
sure,
from Will Hernandez.
yeah,
So,
absolutely,
I mean, this team clearly has a lot of work to do. I mean, we said this even last year, like regardless of who the coach was going to be, this is a team that was going to have to rely on coaching to develop the current slash returning
yeah.
young players, and also coaching and good drafting to bring in some rookies here who can contribute fairly quickly if this team's going to be like even anything better than terrible. So it's a pretty big uphill climb for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, I think, in year one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, I think what they're banking on, and they don't really have a choice. Which they pretty much, Joe Shane's been like, without saying Dave Gettleman's name, he's pretty much like been critical of like what he inherited. Um, and so I think they're pretty clearly banking on all the guys that were hurt last year on offense, especially on offense. Like defense, the defense is going to take a step back. I think that's pretty clear. They're going to have to get rid of James. We'll talk about that quite a bit. They got rid of Logan Ryan. Like they're going to be relying on probably a rookie corner. They're going to be probably starting, rookies at edge. Their defensive line is going to look a little different. Like so, their defense is not going to be as good. Patrick Graham's gone. Wink Martindale is pretty highly regarded, but offensively, they didn't really they added offensive linemen. They're probably gonna have 4 new starters on the offensive line. John Feliciano is probably gonna be the starting center. He has background with the Bills. They got Glowinski, will play right guard. They don't have a right tackle. They've been pretty open about the fact that they're probably going to draft one early. And then left guard, they've signed a bunch of like veteran journeyman, Max Garcia. Uh, what's the other guy from the Bills? His name I'm blanking on. Oh, Jameel Douglas. They have Shane Lemieux coming back, so it's like not that exciting, but it's probably going to look different than the last year of Andrew Thomas. But so they're relying on guys like Kenny Galladay and Kadarius Toney and Sterling Shepard and Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, like all these guys returning to form because they didn't really add weapons. They signed a guy, Robert Foster, who probably won't even make the team. They got Richie James, who's kick returner mainly. So, and they don't have a tight end really. They have Ricky Seals Jones, who's like their only tight end right now, and he's not that exciting. So they're really banking on those guys, Galladay, Toney, Shepard, guys who have durability concerns. If they're healthy,
Barkley.
then maybe yeah, Barkley. If these guys are healthy, then maybe Daboll feels like he can get something out of them. If anybody could, you would think Daboll could do it. He built that Bills offense into one of the best in the league. And it always goes back to how Daniel Jones looks this year. But the offensive line can't get much worse, and their weapons can't really get much worse than they were last year. So, I mean, I said that after 2020, and I was wrong, I guess, because it got worse. But yeah, to go back to Riz's point, like I saw today that the over/under I think was at 7 wins
Yeah.
for the Giants, which seems like crazy high considering what they were last year and that they didn't make any significant changes. Like, doesn't that seem a little high to you?
In terms of, sorry, you cut out there for a second.
Yeah, the Giants over/under is 7 wins.
It's 7 wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's high. Um, I would put it at 6. I guess. I mean it's not 5.5 or 6 maybe. I mean if you're looking for a number that they would conceivably go under, right? So I
Yeah,
think
that's
4 would probably be low. 4.5, 5.5, or 6
I mean, I
maybe.
guess if everything goes right, they can get 7 wins in theory, but
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, and in a big picture, when you're thinking about how do you evaluate Daniel Jones. I mean, this is another new offense, which is going to be a challenge for him to learn. Um, I mean, they've talked about all the ways they've screwed him up with, and one of those ways is a lack of continuity. Well, they're having like more lack of continuity going that, for lack of a better phrasing of that. And then, there's still going to be questions on the offensive line, even though they think for some reason, they think they're going to be better up front. I mean, the bar is low again. And then, they just need to, in their minds, if these skill guys are healthy, that'll give them a better chance to evaluate Daniel Jones, and we'll see. Um, Look, I mean, if Kenny Galladay's fully healthy, is he a difference maker? I think there are obviously there's some skepticism about that. If this guy's really a number one receiver, even if he is fully healthy. So there's just so many what ifs still for Daniel Jones, and there's a lot for him to overcome. And one of those things might just be the fact that he's also just not good. So yeah, they're going to give him this one more shot. I would think they decline his 5th year option. They have till May 2nd to do it, a little less than a month. It would make sense to decline it. I don't know. I presume you agree.
yeah. I mean, so like in theory, if they truly believed in Daniel Jones, then 23 million or whatever it is isn't really that much for next year. But there's like zero risk to declining it. So if you decline it and he's bad, then you just let him go. If you decline it and he's average, then you let him go and you get a comp pick back because he'll sign somewhere else. And if you decline it and he's really good, then you either give him an extension. I'm sure he'd be happy to stay here, or you franchise tag him for like 30 mil or whatever it is. So, or 35, which you pay for a good quarterback. So um, that's a no brainer. Dexter Lawrence is an interesting one too. It's not as newsy, but I would think they exercise that unless they aren't that high on paying a run stopping defensive tackle double digits, which I would understand also because that was kind of a problem that Gettleman kept on running into, where he kept on either overpaying or overdrafting guys that are only run stoppers or whatever. Um, but yeah, the Daniel Jones point again, that we talk about it every year. It's make or break for him. I mean, this is literally make or break because once they decline his option, he's playing on the last year of his deal. And the interesting part about that, which I've been writing in stories, is that so they signed Tyrod Taylor, which I didn't mention earlier, to a 2-year deal. So if they decline Jones's option, then the only quarterback under contract for next year is not Daniel Jones. So I think that tells you that they also, even as much as they want to publicly come out and say he's the guy, and John Mayer believes he's the guy, um, they clearly aren't quite sure if he's the guy.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, well, they should. I mean, that's an obvious thing, but I mean, John Mara's talking like he's sure, but Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen have no reason to think he is right now.
I think they're just saying all the right things.
Yeah,
I think privately they're probably, Yeah, I think you've even if you can read, just reading between the lines, even what John Mara said at the introductory press conferences, like it'll be basically he did say, we're going to give him every opportunity this year. We've done all these things to screw him up. We're trying not do those things again, even though they kind of are because they're changing coaches again. But they think that this offense is going to be quarterback friendly for him. Um, you know, and so they think that this will be the year where he can put it together. But there's even questions that they think is for as much optimism as they have that there's got to be some obviously uncertainty. And so then it becomes what then, right? I mean, you talk about how it's fairly easy to make the decision on Jones. You decline the option, you ran through all the possibilities. Um, what do they do next offseason? They're not going to get Russell Wilson. Obviously, he's in Denver. Um, I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be an option for them next offseason. But so like, what do they do? Do you just bank on being? I know that you don't bank on being bad per se, but if they're not bad enough to be picking high, what do they do? And I think one of the interesting things with this extra first round pick, they got 5 and they have 7, is if they do trade back, which trading back is usually a fine enough thing to do as long as you pick the right player when you trade back.
Yeah.
Um, and they could maybe pick up extra first round pick next year, and they could potentially use that as ammo to move up for a quarterback next year. I think while saving some money that they would have to spend on these draft picks this year because they're so pinched for cap space. So trading back out of 5 or 7, I think could benefit them potentially in multiple ways.
Yeah, and I mean, and you never know who the next quarterback's going to be. That's going to be disgruntled. It seems like they come out of nowhere every year at this point. So, I think accumulating future assets is good. I mean, you look at Lamar Jackson hasn't signed his contract yet. Kyler Murray has all that weird stuff. Not saying I think the Giants can or would get this guys, but there's always somebody who comes out. Like nobody thought Tyreek Hill was going to get traded, and then all of a sudden he was traded. Um, so I think Shane is almost certainly looking to move back. It whether he actually is able to get like a package where you're getting a lot of draft picks next year it depends on what teams view about this like quarterback class, which you get mixed signals. It seems like Malik Willis maybe is the top guy, but is he like a Trevor Lawrence type? Probably not. So, I mean, if they wind up staying at 5 and 7, they'll still probably they should be able to get 2 pretty talented players too. But yeah, as you said, like what's their option next year? They probably, if they win 6 games, that's not enough to get the number 1 pick. So, it's kind of a no man's land that you don't want to be in as a franchise if you're trying to become a playoff team.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, either you have a quarterback or you're looking for one. And then you wrote a little something today. It was interesting about the fallout from that Saints Eagles trade, and we were texting about it a little bit about why would the Saints make that move, and in terms of why they did it, I think it seems like they're potentially positioning themselves to move up for a quarterback. Now, the things that they gave up, they gave up quite a bit.
Yeah,
It looks right now like a pretty clear win for the Eagles in that trade. Obviously, we'll see the players that they get with those picks, right? So the Saints are sitting there right now at what 16 and 19 as I'm looking at the draft
yeah,
order, and so to potentially get say they trade up to 7, right? They could do that. I mean, if the move that they'd want to do is get in front of Atlanta at 8, team in their division that could be looking for a quarterback as well. That is obviously looking at has a ton of quarterback uncertainty. So with Matt Ryan off to Indy, so
yeah.
that would be the one right that you look at, and then the Giants moving back to what 19 or 16, 16 I guess would be the move probably
Yeah, move back to 16.
to 16.
But again, but the issue becomes if I mean Joe Shane has to decide if he thinks this draft has like 19 really good players or whatever. So if he decides that it doesn't, and the Saints all of a sudden don't have their first round pick next year because they just traded with the Eagles, so that's why that trade was so weird to me. I feel like I don't know if having the number 19 pick is more valuable this year or their unknown first round pick next year when the Saints might not be that good this year. So
Right.
uh,
So the Saints don't have a first round pick next year. So what do they give the Giants
yeah,
in terms of ammo that the Giants could potentially use to move up for a quarterback next year? And then the other thing is like, who are the quarter? I mean, we know Bryce Young, right? I think the kid from Alabama, but
yeah.
you
There's
never know how these things unfold.
CJ Stroud from Ohio State is the other big one. It's those 2 guys, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. And so you never know how these things kind of
Yeah,
unfold. But um, I remember a time when I think Taj Boyd was like considered
yeah.
the top quarterback
Comes in here.
going into his final year. Didn't quite work out that way. But obviously that's not something I don't think Joe Schoen is looking and saying, "Oh, Bryce Young is going to be our quarterback in 2023." They would love it. They would love to pay Daniel Jones,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
and
best
have
case
him be
scenario is
there.
Jones is actually good. Yeah.
That's the easiest route. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, and we mentioned him earlier. I guess we should talk about Saquon too, because his future is kind of interesting. Because I feel like if they could, they would trade him, but especially because of that 7 million savings, and the Giants don't really have that much cap. They just restructured Adoree Jackson's deal when Joe Shane really didn't want to do that, but he's kind of stuck right now because they have no money. But I don't know that Saquon has much value, so it's this interesting thing where it makes sense to go into the season like you said, you want to support Daniel Jones, and Saquon being there supports him. But you know what even is the best case scenario here? Like, 'cause I guess the best case scenario in my head would be he plays well and you trade him at the deadline for something. But if he plays all year, he runs for 1,200, 1,400 yards, it looks like his old self, then are they going to get suckered into paying him too much, and then he reverts back to being injury prone again? So it's like such an interesting spot because I probably would still trade him even if it's not great value, and just accept that the season's not going to be very good. Go and draft a running back in the middle rounds. Go all in on that guy. There's been better running backs than Saquon Barkley that have been drafted later than the first round. So I don't know. Where do you stand on the Saquon stuff?
It's tricky because just looking at it from the outside, I mean, not only probably would they not get much for him, but they would probably have to eat some of that salary at 7.2 million. Now,
Yeah,
if they trade
that's
him,
a lot for a running back. That's why you don't pick one second overall, by the way.
right? I mean, it's funny when you hear Joe Shane say at the owners' meetings, and I resisted my usual urge to make snide remarks. But he said, there's a reason he was picked second overall. Well, the reason he was picked second
It's a
overall
bad
was
reason.
because the guy who was just fired from your job was stupid enough to do it. I mean, and that's one of the reasons he got fired. Like, so,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
One of the main reasons. Yeah.
so you could thank him being picked second overall for you having this job, I guess, like, and being stuck with this problem of potentially trying to trade him. Now, a midseason trade, would they have to eat the salary as much of it? I guess, maybe not, right? Because it would be a prorated salary.
Yeah.
So it's just so tricky. Obviously, you want to be able to get a fair read on Daniel Jones, and there's probably a replacement level player for Barkley, especially an injured Barkley, out there to be had in the draft, especially considering the Giants have 5 picks in the top 81.
Yeah.
And then it's not like they have nothing after that, because then they have 112, they have 147, so they have a
And then
high fourth and a high fifth.
if they trade back, they'll have more picks, which
Right, right. So yeah, no, I mean, in an ideal world, they would have traded him. In an ideal world, they would have traded James Bradberry. But everybody on planet Earth knows they're trying to trade these guys.
yeah,
Or, I should rephrase it. They're not shopping Saquon Barkley. They're open to potentially
yeah.
trading him,
Keep
as
phrasing
they
it
should be.
as Joe pointed out. Yeah.
But they are shopping James Bradberry. I mean, that was very clear. Joe Shane was basically hanging a for sale sign on James Bradberry at the owners' meetings, talking about, oh,
Whenever GM does, when he was asked like what's his status, well, he's on the team. That's like clear. He could have easily said we're not trading him, as he was way more defensive with Saquon, so you could tell like where they're at with those two
yeah,
guys.
he's on the team, and remember, he is a good player.
Also,
Like
here are his credentials, and anyway,
yeah, it was like a Craigslist listing that he was reading out loud. I mean, he's trying to get rid of a futon or something. I don't know,
yeah.
but
I am. So, we should talk about the Bradbury thing because that's like the number one story for this team right now,
right now,
for the
yeah,
draft at least. Because it's interesting because he's obviously a really good player. His salary seemed reasonable coming into the offseason, but then the cornerback like market didn't really play out. Like there was a couple big deals, but otherwise like that. Bradbury's 13 million, which is what the acquiring team would have to pay, like 13.5 mil. That looks like a lot now for just 1 year. Like, yeah, the team would want an extension, which reduces the value because they have to have an extension. And it seems like Shane is trying to hold steady and not just releasing him to save the money, because now like 2 million was guaranteed when free agency started, or something like, or a few days after free agency started,
yep,
2 million
yep,
was guaranteed. So he's trying to play chicken with these teams. It doesn't seem like he's going to win. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a team will get desperate. There was a report today that the Chiefs aren't even actually interested in him. Maybe that's just a negotiating ploy, like that says they don't want to take on that money. And I imagine that's why they've had trouble. Number one, everybody knows they're trading him. And number two, the teams don't want to take on that money. Stephon Gilmore is still a free agent. So I don't know. Where do you see that? Where do you see that going? Because I don't see any way that he's on this team. They're I think they saved something like 5 million when they restructured Adoree, but they still need, I think it's something like 12.5 million or 13.5 million for the draft class. Uh, like they need salary cap space for that, and I think you save 12.1 by trading James Bradberry. So there's a little gap there. They need money for the season. When the rosters expand, there's like a couple mil extra that you need to account for. You need a few million for the practice squad. You need, a couple million in reserve for when guys get injured. You need to sign replacements. So like there's just no scenario where James Bradberry is here unless he's agreeing to a pay cut, which he shouldn't. So like where do you see this guy? Like, do they just eventually cut him? Do you think, or like how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean they can't operate right now.
Yeah,
Like you said, you listed all the reasons, and cutting him if they do that would be 10.1 in cap savings, and trading him would be 12.1. So worst comes to worst, they cut him and then they just chalk up the $2 million that they have fully guaranteed to him already at the start of the 2022 league years. Kind of the cost of doing business, unfortunately. Um, yeah, no, I mean, so the should he take a pay cut? Right. So is he going to make 13.4 elsewhere? I mean, I think that's what maybe he probably would, right? I mean, like,
or at least in that range. Maybe he makes 10 mil a year or something like that. But
I
that's
think he should look if they come to for a pay cut. He should obviously call their bluff and say no, go ahead and
yeah,
cut me. So it's he's a good player, so you'd think good player they should be able to get something from. But there are all these factors that mitigate it, which is entering the last year of his deal and the $13.4 million salary. So those are two gigantic factors that will lessen the return that they're going to be able to get for him. And again, especially because they know um, all it takes is a couple teams to get into a bidding war, right?
yeah.
But I just it it's not it's not comparable to like say the Tyreek Hill type situation. And the other thing is this, yeah, I know you mentioned he's a good and capable player, and he did have a good year in 2020. He did not have as good of a year last year.
Yeah, he fell off for sure.
Dory Jackson was better last year than he was. So um, now, granted, Bradbury playing number one cornerback type receivers, Jackson
Probably.
the number two, different scenarios there, but yeah, so they're maybe a mid round pick, right? Could do you think they get a fourth rounder for him? Third?
I thought that at the beginning of the offseason. Now I'm not so sure.
Probably not a third at this point.
No, I mean, if they were to do it, if the trade was happening today, like I would say they might even get maybe like a conditional fifth that can become a fourth or something like that. Like
But
that's what. And
but but not have to eat any of the salary,
yeah,
right?
well, that's also there's also reporting that they're willing to eat some of the salary if that helps get a better draft pick. But I don't know like how much of that salary they're willing to eat.
They need the cap room and the salary relief more than they need a fourth round pick versus a fifth round pick,
Yeah.
wouldn't you say?
Yeah. So I guess it comes down to like we don't know what like is Shane demanding a second round pick? Like we don't know what he's demanding. Like he doesn't have leverage is the reality. And so I
He
mean,
has no leverage.
what is interesting is like in maybe I don't know that Dave Gettleman was known as being patient. Like he's like standing his ground as long as he has to. Like he doesn't have to do anything necessarily until the draft. But once the draft comes and goes, then then you have to sign those draft picks and then it becomes an issue. So I respect him like standing his ground instead of like rushing to a decision. But I don't really know where this play. Like this is why you see a lot of times teams make trades where like a very talented player is traded for like a sixth round pick or something. Like Amari Cooper was traded for a fifth, I think. Like a Pro Bowl wide receiver traded for fifth, but it's because it's all about the money. Like it's just salary cap hits and whether they can restructure and all this stuff. And that's why you see teams like stealing guys for very cheap. And the Giants never seem to be the team that are stealing the guy, I would say. But so that's why it's unfortunate. Like it's funny. I've even written this. The irony is James Bradberry is probably Gettleman's best free agent signing he made, and they can't afford to keep him because of all his other bad moves. Because their cap situation got so bad that they restructured him like 3 times last year, which made his cap hit 21 million right now, which is why they can't keep him. But if they hadn't done all that, then they wouldn't have to get rid of him, and you'd have a cornerback, which is a very important position in the modern NFL. And instead, they're going to have to get rid of him, and then they're going to have to replace James Bradberry too, which is a part of this. Like they're not only getting rid of him, you're creating a hole at corner because I don't know if Aaron Robinson and Darnay Holmes have shown enough that you can rely on them. So they're probably going to wind up drafting somebody pretty early. So it's like a whole cycle that started just because Dave Gettleman wanted to go and sign Kenny Galladay last year, essentially.
Yeah, and give Leonard Williams enormous money or
Yeah,
trade for Leonard Williams in the first place and franchise tag him. So that's the fascinating part of all this, and the interesting part and stressful part about being a GM is that all these things are interconnected in the league where you have a cap. And so they don't, like you said, I mean, yeah, Dave Gettleman, um, did a nice job signing James Bradberry, but they backloaded the contract, they redid the contract, and this is why it's doing these sort of things, restructuring contracts is GMs don't want to do that. I mean, that's why I'm sure it was pretty painful for Joe Schoen to rework the Adoree Jackson deal to the point that, the escape hatch after next year is going to be more painful for the Giants if they want to get rid of him. Now, I mean, he was a pretty good player last year, and so if he plays well again, I'm sure they'll happily pay him the balance of the contract, which is what, like 39 million over 3 years.
Yeah.
It's not terrible.
For a number one corner is not bad, but if he doesn't live up to that, then it is. Yeah.
Right, and we're about to find out potentially if he is a number one corner this year, if he has that ability to defend those type of receivers. So,
mean, they're clearly banking on that because when they restructured him, it was the three contracts you can restructure right now are him, Leonard Williams, and Kenny Galladay. So they still might have to restructure Leonard Williams. I would say if you were ranking them, I might have even thought they would have done Leonard before Adoree, honestly, but because I think Leonard's cap hit is what, like 27 million this year.
yeah, and I mean that's another deal situation where
they're probably gonna, even if it's just like a little restructure, like they're even after trading Bradberry, like I said, there's all these other things they have to account for.
right,
They'll have a lot of holes on the roster, so
27
odds
million.
are he's probably going to have to do it with him too. Kenny Galladay, I imagine they're going to avoid like the plague with that because you want to be able to get out of that contract as soon as you can. Even if Kenny Galladay is a good year this year, it's still too much money. So, it's just interesting. Like that, I didn't expect them Adoree to be like the first one out of those. I guess it makes sense because his contract's not as big as the other two, but I don't know. And he's younger, I guess too, because he's only 26 or 27 or something like that. I think maybe I got that wrong. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be, I would say, like, to Joe Shane's credit, like it would have been very easy to, he said all that stuff about not wanting to restructure. He could have gone into free agency and seen a shiny player that he liked, that he wanted to bring in, and decided, I want to go and get that guy. And he didn't. They didn't restructure anybody besides Graham Gano, I guess. Which, if you're restructuring a kicker, kind of says everything about your cap situation. But yeah, he stuck to his gun. So that Mark Lewinsky, I think it was like 18 million over 3 years. Tyrod Taylor, 11 million over 2, and John Feliciano is like 1 year and 3.5 million. Those are the only three guys that were above the minimum, and they signed like 10 guys. So, I mean, nothing exciting. Like their roster probably isn't better than it was last year overall. Maybe their offensive line will be better,
Yeah,
but
definitely is not better.
it is interesting covering a GM who seems to
I
like
mean, they're just banking on these
have
guys
a
they
better.
spent big money on
Like his
last year playing well.
Yeah. Shane just seems to have a better grasp of the salary cap and, the consequences of, being hasty and making big moves. And he's even said he doesn't like to build through free agency. He'd rather build through the draft and then pay the guys that are already on the roster. And,
That's smart.
we'll
And
see,
that, look,
we'll see if he sticks with that. It's easy to say now when they have no money. Like they're gonna have a lot of money next year. They should, and we'll see if he sticks with it. But I think I'm encouraged at the very early going with him, I would say.
yeah, I mean, he seems competent and not particularly impulsive, and that's what I would think most GMs are today in
Darryl,
today's
you cut
NFL.
out.
I
You
think
there?
Dave Gettleman a little bit of an outlier there, and Gettleman I'm sure would have preferred to have built through the draft too, but he drafted bad players like Will Hernandez, and he drafted Saquon Barkley too high. He did dumb things in the draft, or maybe they seemed smart at the time, but wrong things that turned out to be the wrong moves, and so. Joe Schoen is sitting here and thanks to Dave Gettleman because of the trade back move last year with the Bears, he has an extra first round pick, and then he got an extra third rounder from the Dolphins. So that's why now he drafted Kadarius Toney in the first round. So I mean, it's one thing to get the extra pick, but then the pick that they traded back and got so far has not paid off. So
Yeah,
there's
you have to weigh. You have to weigh. Like they need a hit on that extra pick, otherwise it looks. So if they get Kayvon Thibodeau and Conwu, then it looks better that you had Tony. But if that pick is bad and you could have had Micah Parsons, then that's not really that great of a trade.
you got to consider that like the totality of the haul once all the picks are made and at 5 and 7 and 36 and 67, I mean, and then even 81, like you have a chance out of those 5 picks to get what, like 2 or 3 at least decent players or decent star guys who are going to contribute immediately, or certainly on this team, who will be asked to contribute significantly immediately. So that's the reality. I mean, I think, at 5 or 7, you're looking at a guy who perhaps will be your starting right tackle, whether that, is Evan Neal, Conwu, the Ike Conwu kid from NC State, or I don't know, maybe is Charles Cross there from Mississippi State. So those are the three tackles, and then what do you do at corner, right? I mean, so they have so many needs and so many holes, and they're about to potentially create another one by trading James Bradberry. Or do you just bite the bullet, start Aaron Robinson there, and then revisit corner next offseason? It's not something they can necessarily attack all at once in one offseason. This is going to be a process. And I know people are tired of this team rebuilding, but the problem is
They didn't
when
really
you've been
rebuild before.
rebuilding
Is the problem.
for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's clear that you haven't been doing it the right way, and you need to kind of start over, right? So it's not a continued rebuild. This is like another phase to the whole thing. And so the Giants are going to be bad this year. Um, and I would be shocked if they win. I would be shocked if they win 7. I was shocked that's an awfully high number for the win total.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how the rest of the offseason goes and what they do with their roster. But their offensive line, it can't get worse again. It should be better, but it's not going to be good still. Like John Feliciano was benched by the Bills. Mark Lewinsky was an average player for the Colts. So it's not like they're adding these Pro Bowlers, and they need a rookie at right tackle to be a stud, and maybe a rookie at left guard potentially. And so, it could be a long season, but you hope that you have a coach that is better at putting them in position to succeed than Jason Garrett was on offense. I feel pretty good about Daboll being that, but I mean, until we see it, who knows?
I mean, there's a lot of situations where you say like the Giants should be better, if only because the bar was so low. I mean,
Yeah,
offensive coordinator competence, general manager competence, offensive line play. Those would be the three big ones. Obviously, you could potentially even put pass rush in there. But maybe they're a little bit better on their line. It's just hard to see a way in which they're going to be markedly better on their offensive line. And that's been such a liability for them. You and I wrote a whole novella, a whole opus about that last year.
yeah,
And this is another chapter in it. I mean, they're not able to make. Now, if they hit on Evan Neal, then maybe they got two pretty good tackles. And if Andrew Thomas takes a step forward, but they're not, they can't correct it all at once. And I'm not just talking about the totality of the roster. Even the line, offensive line, it's not something they can fix in one off season because of the position of where they're at cap wise. But that's why Joe Schoen wanted to. I mean, he's talked openly about this. This is why he wanted to clear all this cap space and take on the dead money all at once and just rip the Band-Aid off. That's why we looked at it and said like, oh, gee, there's going to be a significant amount of dead money associated with cutting James Bradberry, but 11 in dead and 10 in cap savings, right? If they cut him, that's a lot of dead money. But he's willing to take it on because, and look, they're taking on $11.4 million in dead money with Logan Ryan.
yeah,
mean,
and they only saved $700,000,
which is, obviously it's clear that he was not a fit on
yeah,
multiple levels, and so he's ripping the Band-Aid off here, and he's trying to tell people in not so subtle terms that this is a bad situation, and either temper your expectations or like put them in the garbage. Quite frankly.
That's why it's funny. Every now and then everybody needs a different opinion than what's out there. So I guess I get it. But you'll see like a national reporter or something be like, who could surprise people this year? The Giants.
No, not
No,
happening.
no. The Giants don't think they can. John Mara is like basically admitted that he knows it's going to be a struggle this year. Like,
I think if they are 7-10, that would be a surprise, and
yeah,
people should be
I
rejoicing.
think they are smartly tempering the expectations, like pretty like clearly, like they're not making it. They're not hiding it. Like they know. Like Joe Schoen said something along the lines of, "We can afford to take the best player available because we have so many needs." He said that after free agency, so it's not like he said it
crazy.
before. Like
I
that.
mean,
That's an admission that the roster is no good.
yeah, in not so many words, they keep saying we stink, but it's not my fault, and it's not. They
Yeah.
do stink, and it's not their fault. Like, so I'm not going to rip the GM for being honest, even in a semi-veiled way about it. It's not. Now in 3 years, yeah, it's going to be his fault if they're
Yeah.
still
Once he
that.
starts having his own draft classes and they fail or they don't fail, then that's when we can start criticizing.
And that's where Joe Douglas is with the Jets at this point. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah. Joe and Douglas came in such a weird time that he got like 2 years of leeway pretty much before maybe even a little more than that because he came in after the draft that 1 year.
Right. He was hired in May of 2019, so his
Well,
first year offseason wasn't
remains the
until
weirdest
2020.
offseason for a team I've seen in a long time, but this is in a Jets podcast, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly players you can look at on this roster, and so if this is a developmental year, right? And it's not like the whole year is a loss. Like, so you look at, can Xavier McKinney continue to grow? Can Andrew Thomas continue to progress? There are obviously guys. I mean, Leonard Williams, can he be a player who they in 2023 can rely on to maybe push this team into being a late season surprise playoff contender? Okay, so like Dexter Lawrence, what is he going to give? Like Kadarius Toney's a total mystery man, but he's a fascinating player because he flashed a little bit last year.
Yeah.
So there are certainly these guys, and obviously the Jones thing, but like there are certainly these guys who you look at and say, well, these 4 or 5 or 6 guys are not lost causes. They are worth following, and they're not dead weight. And so you'd hesitate to call all of those guys foundational players, but this is a year where you're going to find out to what degree they can be that, right? And I think especially Andrew Thomas, because he improved so much last year. Can he take the next step? And so there are certainly, I mean, look, Ricky Seals-Jones is not like going to be one of those guys, right? You kind of know what he is. But there are certainly guys who are going to be worth paying attention to this year, even as this is going to probably be a long year where the quarterback is under the microscope every week. And again, maybe he's potentially struggling for things that are not within his control, but hey, that's life in the NFL. So, and then you look for things like how does Daboll handle all this, right?
Yep.
That's the other thing. Rookie head coach again, the guy who's never been a head coach, just like Joe Judge.
When they're getting beat up by good teams, he's going to get criticized for it.
What's his demeanor going to be like, right? How is he going to handle practices? So I think there's some interest. I think if you like the Giants, obviously you're going to follow them no matter what. But I think there are interesting things about this team, even though it's pretty clear they're not going to be a contender.
Well, and I think Giants fans can be optimistic about the direction because it seems like the Giants are doing logical things now as opposed to, trying to win while rebuilding, the whole Gettleman thing. Like they're not doing that stuff anymore. They're committed to the rebuild this year. Like you mentioned, I think that was a good point that this year is completely an evaluation year. They're evaluating every single person on this roster if they deserve to be here long term. I don't know if you can point to any. Andrew Thomas might be the only one that I would say definitively will be here in 2023. And I guess maybe you could say Xavier McKinney too, just because he's on a rookie deal. Like guys that you can count on to be like good players to them in 2023. Those might be the only two.
Yeah, but maybe somebody surprises.
Everybody else is a question.
Yeah.
I mean, Aziz Ojolari maybe, but like
maybe
who knows if last year was a fluke or not. So this is not a talented roster, and these guys all need to prove if they want to stay here, they need to prove they deserve to. And I think a lot of guys are gonna get a chance to play. I imagine they'll give a lot of people a chance to prove what they can do. These rookies are going to play right away, which is, it might look rough this year, but I think it will be good in the long run that they're getting early experience. So,
I've covered a few of these with the Jets, man. So I know all about the evaluation year where you sit here in April and you say, "Oh my goodness, we're going to be at Halloween writing mock drafts and writing, how the 3rd round or 4th round pick is playing because he's starting or whatever." But you're right though. I mean, ripping the Band-Aid off is the way to do it. Like it never works when you're in this weird middle ground with a quarterback who may or may not be good, not a guy who stinks or is great, and you're trying to rebuild while winning. It never works. Ripping the Band-Aid off like they did with firing everybody, with eating all this dead money, with whatever, trying to trade guys maybe they can or can't be able to do it. That's the way to do it. You have to do it that way. And I think in retrospect, I mean, like we really haven't talked since Joe Judge got fired, but like, did he get a little bit of a raw deal? Yeah, probably. I mean, he didn't do himself any favors by talking himself out of a job, but by saying like insane stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe a little bit of a raw deal. But to get a decent general manager, you had to get guys in the same timeline. You don't want to have a GM and a coach on different timelines. It just never works, usually. And so they ripped the Band-Aid off. They got a rookie head coach, a rookie general manager who are, and they're coming in here with tempered expectations and a potential escape hatch for your quarterback. They're not locked into the quarterback, which I think, you could be looking at next year with new quarterback, rookie quarterback, second-year GM, second-year head coach, and then maybe you want results by 2024? My gosh. I mean, sorry for the older Giants fans who are like wanting results immediately. I'd
Yeah,
feel bad for those folks, but hey, Super Bowl win in 2007 and 11. So I don't think Jets fans would tell you got nothing to complain about.
sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think the Giants are one of the more interesting teams in the draft, so the draft's going to be interesting. They have the Bradberry thing coming, so there are at least some storylines for us to keep an eye on these next few weeks. The Daniel Jones option, all that stuff. We can wrap up there. I know you got to go pick up your kid. So we'll wrap up there. We'll get back to you guys either if there's a Bradberry trade or something notable happens before the draft. But if not, we'll see. We'll do a pod then. And thank you guys for listening.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
If you want to talk about sports, you also better be ready to talk about politics, culture, and business. I'm LG Granderson, formerly of ESPN, now with the Los Angeles Times.
And I'm Will Leach, currently a contributing editor with New York Magazine.
We host The Long Game with LG and Leach, a weekly podcast where we break down the biggest stories in sports and how they impact every facet of our lives.
Did the media drop the ball on Brittany Griner?
It took us 3 weeks to realize she was missing, so yeah, I'd say we failed.
Who's done more damage, Jerry Jones or Dan Snyder?
Can we just call it a tie and leave it at that? Is it possible to be an ethical sports fan?
Not when Deshaun Watson's guaranteed $230 million. We are all dirty, LZ. That's The Long Game with LZ and Leach.
Dropping every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts.
Please tell me Cleveland isn't winning the Super Bowl.
Acast
recommends.